Tonight we present The Echoes of the Arizona Desert. Part 1, The Whispers of the Sands. In the heart of the Sonoran Desert, Arizona, there lies a place locals avoid at all costs, the Valley of the Lost. It's said that those who venture into its dunes never return or, if they do, they are no longer the same. Legends claim that this scorching, barren landscape hides dark secrets that have claimed the lives of many who dared to explore its depths. It was here that Ethan Harper, a young adventurer, decided to explore one summer afternoon in 1998. Armed with his camera and notebook, Ethan ventured into the desert, determined to document the strange lights that were said to float above the dunes on moonless nights. The first few hours of his expedition were uneventful, almost dull. But as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Ethan felt a shift in the air. The dry heat of the day was replaced by a sudden chill, and in the distance, he heard what sounded like whispers, as if the very sands were speaking to him. Part 2, The Darkness of the Valley. As Ethan ventured deeper into the Valley of the Lost, the whispers grew clearer, more insistent. Though the words were unintelligible, their tone was unmistakable, warnings. The sky, once clear, began to darken, and an unnatural wind kicked up the sand in swirling eddies around him. In the distance, Ethan saw a figure. It was tall and thin, barely visible against the desert shadows. Thinking it might be another lost traveler, Ethan ran towards it. But as he approached, the figure seemed to dissolve into the air. Yet the whispers didn't stop. In fact, they grew louder, as though thousands of voices surrounded him, calling his name. Heart pounding, Ethan glanced around, feeling trapped. The dunes loomed like giants, and night was falling fast, enveloping him in its terrifying grip. Unwittingly, he had ventured into the heart of the desert, where legends said the souls of the lost wandered for eternity. Part 3, The Screams in the Silence. Ethan tried to stay calm, but fear crept over him with every step. The desert, which had been a barren, peaceful landscape during the day, had now transformed into a labyrinth of shadows and impossible sounds. He switched on his flashlight, but to his horror, the light barely pierced the surrounding darkness. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a scream. It was a distant, guttural cry, coming from deep within the desert. The scream echoed through the dunes, sending a chill down Ethan's spine. It wasn't human, yet it didn't sound like any animal either. It was a cry of agony, of despair, as if the desert itself mourned the souls it had claimed. Ethan quickened his pace, realizing he was lost. There were no markers in the sand to guide him back. As panic set in, he heard the scream again, this time closer. Then he saw something that froze him in place, a hand emerging from the sand, moving slowly, as if someone was trying to crawl out from below. Part 4, The Voices of the Fallen. Ethan gasped for air. What was he seeing? The hand moved slowly, crawling toward the surface, and at that moment, the voices in the air intensified. No longer whispers, they were now screams, anguished cries of souls seemingly trapped in the wind. Stumbling backward, Ethan fell, his flashlight rolling across the sand, extinguishing as it did. The darkness swallowed him whole. Desperate, he began to crawl in the direction he thought was the way out, but the voices surrounded him, shouting, laughing, calling his name. The cold intensified, as if the desert's heat had been drained away by some unseen force. Then, just as Ethan was about to give up, he heard a whisper clearer than all the others, right next to his ear, "Come with us." Part 5, The Dark Presence. The words froze Ethan in place. Trembling, he tried to stand, but something held him down. It was as if an invisible hand had grabbed his ankle, pulling him toward the sand. He looked down, horrified to see that the hand from earlier now gripped him tightly, dragging him toward the sandy abyss. With all his strength, Ethan tried to break free, but the harder he fought, the stronger the pull became. The sand began to move, as though it had a life of its own, wrapping around his legs. All around him, the voices called his name, whispering, laughing in the darkness. Just as the sand began to cover his waist, a figure appeared in the distance. It was tall, with a terrifying presence, shrouded in shadows that seemed to devour the light. The figure's eyes glowed in the darkness, watching him with unspeakable malice. Part 6, The Abyss of the Desert. Ethan tried to scream, but the sound caught in his throat. The dark figure moved slowly toward him, and with each step it took, the air grew denser, colder. The hand gripping him pulled harder, dragging him into the sand, which now seemed to devour him. Desperate, Ethan looked around for any escape, but there was none. The figure reached him, its glowing eyes filled with a mixture of hunger and hatred. As it raised its hand, Ethan saw a dark mist emanating from its fingers, beginning to envelop everything around him. The voices in the air became deafening. Ethan felt the desert claiming him, as though something greater than himself was pulling him into oblivion. The last thing he saw before being consumed by the darkness was the figure's face, twisted into a grin that didn't belong in this world. When the rescuers arrived days later, they found only Ethan's footprints in the sand, ending abruptly in the middle of the desert. There was no body, no sign of a struggle, just the endless silence of the Valley of the Lost. The desert had claimed another victim, and the locals knew it wouldn't be the last. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to support our YouTube channel.